Hi everyone, today I'm sharing another story from our DDTSB help desk. We were contacted by a Danish workshop, and in their workshop they had a stranded 2020 Audi e-Tron. The car was completely dead, it wouldn't move forward or backward anymore. They scanned the vehicle for fault codes and there were many high voltage fault codes stored, including insulation fault codes and fault codes for both drive motors. This vehicle uses an electric drive motor for the front axle and an electric drive motor for the rear axle, and there were fault codes stored for both. Now, these Audi motors are known to have their fair share of issues, so it's pretty easy to assume there's something wrong with those motors. But those motors are very expensive, so just to be sure, that workshop reached out to our help desk. We asked the workshop to share a complete fault code scan of the vehicle with us. We went through the scan and we noticed a pattern. We were pretty sure that at least one of the high voltage fuses was blown. More specifically, high voltage fuse number 3. The question wasn't if that fuse was blown, we were pretty sure, but of course why it had blown and where is it located. We went through OEM data for hours, but we couldn't find a document that clearly showed us the location of high voltage fuse number 3. In this case, real-world knowledge made all the difference. At DDTSB, we collect faulty high voltage components and store them in our component library. We use these components to study them, to make better and more detailed bulletins, but also to be of better assistance in diagnostic hotline cases, especially when manufacturer's information falls short, or in this case, isn't available at all. The high voltage fuses on this model are placed on top of the high voltage battery in a component that's called the SX6 unit. Now, since we have access to a dismantled unit from our library, we were able to physically identify the exact location of high voltage fuse number 3. Unfortunately, this is information that just isn't available in the OEM diagrams. There's a key point we need to understand. An isolation fault on its own usually doesn't cause a high voltage fuse to blow. To blow a high voltage fuse, we need a short circuit. And not every isolation fault is a short circuit. A loss of isolation means we have lost some of the isolation, but it doesn't always mean we already have a full short circuit. Experience learns us that 9 out of 10 times on an EV, high voltage fuses blow because of an internal short inside a component. Now that we knew the location of high voltage fuse number 3, we asked the technician to physically follow the wire from fuse number 3 to see what component it supplied. He traced the wire and it ended up at the PDC heater. We asked the technician to test the PDC heater and he confirmed that the PDC heater had failed the isolation test and had an internal short. Exactly the conditions that cause a high voltage fuse to blow. Let's talk about the costs. Of course, Audi doesn't sell this fuse separately. You need to buy an entire new SX6 unit, which costs about 2,900 euros excluding VAT. And that doesn't even include the new PDC heater we need, which is about 2,000 euros excluding VAT. This is a lot of money, and sadly, all these costs could have been easily avoided. Yep, you heard me right, 5,000 euros of cost that could easily have been avoided. And I'm not even talking about labor, because this is a huge job. You've got to drop the battery in order to change the SX6 unit. The PDC heater is located in the plenum chamber. If you don't regularly clean the drains of the plenum chamber, they can get clogged, the water level will rise, and finally it will enter the PDC heater, creating an internal short that then blows the high voltage fuse. That fuse can be bought separately and you need to change 5,000 euros worth of parts that could easily have been avoided if you clean those drains with every service. It's only a 15-minute job. Of course, we made a DDTSB bulletin on the blown high voltage fuse, and this bulletin contains more information than you will ever find in the OEM documentation. We also made a maintenance bulletin available that highlights the importance of keeping those drains in the plenum chamber clean. It really makes a difference. It's only a 15-minute job, but it can avoid you from replacing very expensive parts. I don't want this video to end sad, so I can tell you that we decided to send our spare fuse from our spare part that we had in our parts library to the workshop, so at least we could help the customer avoid having to pay for a €3,000 part that he essentially doesn't need. If you are a technician or a shop owner yourself, and you're also interested in saving your customer some money, if you're tired of searching for hours and hours on faults that have already been solved by others, or you want to work more profitable, then go to diagnosedan.com and read all about what DDTSB can do for you.